Okay, this is going to be a video over Chapter 3, Global Business in your Business Principles course. And I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. This is a Word document. And so what I've done is just out to the side, I've made myself some notes and used some notes. And so I'm going to post this under the video. If you want to use it, you're welcome to. I've got a lot of graphics to show you as we go through, websites to show you as we go through. But I'll try to highlight the most important things as we go through the chapter. And it's only 6 pages of notes here, so definitely read through it. You can scan through the chapter in the book, and that will help you too. But anyway, this first little section is just an intro section. But if you go down here, it's talking about global trade in the United States. So right here, I highlighted a few things here. 85% of all U.S. exports of manufactured goods are shipped by 250 companies. That's a good bit of our exporting is done by just 250 companies in the U.S. And 98% of all exporters are small or medium-sized firms. So you don't have to be a big company to get involved in exporting goods to other countries, and we'll talk more about that at the end. By the way, these numbers are not important as far as when it comes to studying for the test. There are way too many numbers here to memorize. I want you to get the idea of what's going on here. So like where I have in 2018, blah, blah, blah. We'll look over here on the side. I have the U.S. exported $2.8 trillion through November of 2022. And so you need to just know that we are increasing the number of exports this year, every year. But at the same time, we're increasing the number of products that we import. So notice that we imported $3.6 trillion worth. So this is called an unfavorable balance of trade, and we don't want that to be the case. We want to export more than we import. So anyway, I've got a graphic here. Let me just see if I've got this pulled up. Well, here's our GDP. And this is something that we covered in another chapter, $23 trillion in GDP. But out of that, 28% of our GDP is being created by exports, or about a little over a quarter of it. So that's very interesting. Exports are a really important part of our economy. So anyway, I listed for you here our top 5 export partners: Canada, Mexico, China. It's been this way for years and years and years. The order may change at times, but anyway, they're our top 5 export partners. In other words, we export the most of our goods to Canada, and then to Mexico, and then to China. But if you look down here, our top 5 importers are China, Mexico, and Canada. And so this is one of the things that President Trump tried to get kind of changed, because we are accepting goods or pulling goods in from China, a lot of goods, and they're not buying as much back, so to be sold in their country. He put some trade restrictions on China. And of course, that made things more expensive for us in the U.S. That's one of the problems with trade restrictions, made things scarce as well. So anyway, just so you'll know, Canada, Mexico, China are really our 3 main trading partners. And when it comes to who we bring in the most from, of course, it's China. And you can see these are pretty good sized numbers, $499 billion worth of stuff. Definitely want to put in your notes that it is an unfavorable balance of trade. So what does the U.S. export and import? Let me just take you over to a another, I could just close this one probably. But anyway, if you go out to the International Trade Administration, they've got all kinds of data out there, and they can show you, you know, how much that we're exporting and importing every month and every quarter. You can see, for example, imports here in red, and you can see in blue exports how we have an unfavorable balance of trade. Same thing as, well, not the same thing in services. In services, we actually do better. We export more services. So, but as far as goods go, manufactured goods, we have an unfavorable balance of trade. You'll see some things like automotive, like cars and automotive parts, food and beverages, consumer goods, capital goods, industrial supplies being the number one. So there are a lot of things that we export, and I'm going to give you a list of things that we export from U.S. and from Texas. But here are the top 5 partners, and you can see in Canada, here's how much we exported to them compared to how much we, let's see, is this exports? That's 2021 exports versus 2022 exports. So you can kind of get an idea that we are increasing our exports to every country. You can see China is almost a wash between the 2 years. But over on the import side, you can look again and you can see that we're importing more from China than we did the previous year. Same thing from Mexico. Same thing from Canada. So this is the one that's really killing us right here, that we're not exporting a lot out to China, but we're letting a lot come in from China, more come in from China. So that was one of the things that President Trump was trying to turn around, and he did in some respects. So anyway, I put links out here, and I'm going to drop this document below the video so that you can come in here and click on these links. All it takes, this is a Word document, and all it takes is you hold your control key down and you see how it'll turn into a hand, and you can click each of the links in there. Well, here it says China, Canada, Mexico, and it gives a list or the top trading partners. You might want to just highlight China, Canada, Mexico, like I did here. Those are our top trading partners. And of course, the main reason we trade so much with Canada and Mexico is we're right here together. So we have a common border, and as far as delivery, you know, it's pretty easy to get it from one place to the other. And Canada has a very similar standard of living as we do. Mexico does not, but a lot of the goods that we make in the United States could be sold in Canada. You know, it's at a very similar price, in other words. So anyway, in this chapter, in my notes, it talks about the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA is no longer. So again, when President Trump came in, one of the things he wanted to do was to make trading more equal between the countries. So he scrapped NAFTA. So wherever you see that in the notes, NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, he scrapped that, and what we have now is the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, USMCA. So the idea is the same, though. The idea is to get rid of barriers between the countries so that you can have more free trade and less tariffs, so that reduces the prices on goods for consumers. So anyway, Texas exports a lot of petroleum products. We know that oil and gas here is a big thing. We export a lot of oil and gas and petroleum products, autos, computer products. And I listed some of the big players in the export business in Texas. And of course, you can see the numbers here, same players. So Texas exports to Mexico, to Canada, and to China. And again, I think I have a list here. Let me see if I've got a list. Yeah, the world's top exports. If you go down here, again, you'll have access to these links, but you can see what's being exported. You know, oil and gas, or vehicles, or aircraft parts or whatever it might be. But I've got all that listed here so you can see what the U.S. is doing, and then a little farther down where we have some deficits. Here are the companies that actually are involved in a lot of the exporting. So anyway, there's a lot of good information in here to kind of show you what's being exported out of the United States. If I go to this one is from Texas, so it might be more interesting to you. So again, oils, petroleums, you can see those are top three: liquid propane, liquefied propane. But look, we got circuit boards, which is you would think is a California thing, but we do that in Texas as well. Computer parts, aircraft parts. So there's semiconductors. So you can see we're a big exporter of computer parts, and that's a big deal for us. So anyway, again, it shows you on the Texas side how much they export out of each one of each kind of thing, and then the biggest trade partners again: Mexico, Canada, China. So same kind of setup as on the other one, but you can see it's the same partners, same trading partners that we're selling to. And of course, China again is the one that's killing us because they dump more in here than they buy out of here. So you can see China's only $21.6 billion, where Mexico bought $123 billion from Texans. So it's good information to know. And on the quiz and on the test, just know China, Canada, Mexico are our top three trading partners, that we have an unfavorable balance of trade nationally. We should be seeing more things exported out of our state and out of our country than imported. So anyway, that's what I have highlighted here, the definition of export versus an import. You do need to know the difference between a balance of trade and a balance of payments. Okay. So let's talk about the balance of trade for a minute. Well, that's what we've been talking about when we looked at how much was exported versus how much was imported into the country. And when you look, you would love to be the one on the side of where you exported more out than brought in. But it's the other way around. Has been for years and years. So since the early 70s, and I put a note over here about it. So it says since the early 70s, we've imported more than we've exported. And I think I have a graphic on this one. Let me check and see here. Yeah, so here it's showing the U.S. trade balance for 2020 was about $651 billion. And here's a graph showing that. So this is zero right here. In other words, if we imported as much as we exported, this line right here is zero. Well, you can see since about 1970, we've had a few years we were right on the line, but for years and years and years, and starting really in the 80s, boom, here we just dropped way out in the 90s. We started importing more goods from China and other places. And so we're way below zero, below underwater, you might say. So that's what Trump was trying to turn around in 2018. You can see he didn't do it either. He didn't get it done either because it's still continuing to go down. But it's always best for our American workers, for us to make it and push it out of the country to other places, sell it to other places, than to have another country make it and we bring it in and our American workers don't have those jobs. So that just gives you an idea of how underwater we are as far as exports and imports are concerned. So anyway, right here, I put a link to that. You're welcome to go out and look at all that stuff. But that's balance of trade. And we have an unfavorable, you can see it right here, unfavorable balance of trade. In other words, every year we end up having a trade deficit. And I don't know that I have a chart. Yeah, it's not showing. You actually just have to pull across it to see. But every year you see we have a trade deficit or an unfavorable balance of trade. So definitely need to highlight that, put that in your notes that we have a trade deficit, unfavorable balance of trade. We would like it to be different, opposite. And we'd like to put our American workers and manufacturing back to work. Okay, so what's the difference in balance of trade versus balance of payments? Well, let's get the definition here. A country's balance of payments is a summary of all the country's international financial transactions, showing the difference between the country's total payments to and total receipts from another country or other countries. So notice what it includes. Yes, it includes imports, exports, which we know we're going to be negative on, but it also includes any money that goes out of this country that we invest in other countries. So interest on money borrowed from other countries. Okay, what about if we supply aid to Ukraine, aid to foreign governments? That money is going out of this country, or it could be weapons or whatever that's going out of this country, and it counts against us on the balance of payments. So you can expect this next year, the way Biden has been spending money, that we'll have again another unfavorable balance of payments. So balance of trade just deals with imports and exports. Balance of payments is every dollar that leaves this country to go into the pockets of people in another country. Okay, so definitely get that definition, those two definitions down so you'll know what we're talking about there. Again, I've got another graphic. So let me see if I've got this one up and running here. Yeah, here's the balance of payments, BOP. And notice again, here's the zero line. We're doing pretty good till we hit the 80s. We take a little dip, we try to come back in 90, and then boom, you can see we really cratered. And so there are lots of things that have gone on here from, wars that we're in and military stuff where we're providing weapons to other countries or whatever it might be. It could be aid to other countries for disasters, anything where dollars leave the United States. So again, you can tell 846 billion. That's pretty good deficit there. Okay, so I don't think I had anything here. These all break down all the other countries. So okay. So let's go back here. That was the link here. So it says we haven't had an unfavorable balance of payments since 1950. It's $850 billion worth this year. So this one up here since the 70s for the balance of trade, and you can go back and look and see what it's been over the years. But $600 billion is a huge unfavorable balance of trade. And that's what Trump was trying to correct, protect American workers and get more dollars coming back into the United States than going out. Okay, this little section deals with absolute advantage versus comparative advantage. Definitely need to get the definition down. So this one says, in an absolute advantage, you can produce and sell products at a lower cost than any other country. Make sure you highlight this, any other country. Any other country. So if you can make a product better than any other country, well, you ought to be the one that makes it, and then you ought to be able to trade it with other countries. So I gave you some examples like Saudi Arabia's, got plenty of oil, OPEC, part of OPEC. So they should be able to make oil and trade it. And so they do it, but have it more raw materials. So they should do it, of course, we have our own oil production or possible oil production here. And we can talk about why we wouldn't want to totally just shut off all oil production and get it off from Saudi Arabia. That would not make any sense politically for us. But anyway, I gave you some other examples like South Africa produces diamonds, Australia produces wool. Anyway, if you produce something better than any other country, you have an absolute advantage. Okay, and I gave you some more examples over here of countries that have an absolute advantage. Then it gives you the definition of a comparative advantage. Well, we make all kinds of stuff here in the United States, but what if your little country that you live in can really make three things, but you do one of them really well? Why wouldn't you specialize in that one and then trade it and then buy from somebody else that does another thing well from another country? That's a comparative advantage. When I look at all of my things that I produce and I'll say, okay, I can produce this one better than these other ones, I have a comparative advantage in that. So I don't know that here we go. It says the United States has an advantage in computer software, airplanes, some agricultural products, heavy machinery, jet engines. I mean, we have some comparative advantages. For example, India and Vietnam have a comparative advantage in producing clothing because of low labor costs. Now, you might say, well, what about human rights problems in some of those countries? I totally understand. But anyway, you just need to know the difference here. Absolute is when you can produce it better than any other country. Any other country. Comparative is when you can produce something more efficiently than any other product that you can make in your own country. So we definitely want to have free trade. The problem is we don't want to be totally dependent on other countries for like oil production, like OPEC. We don't want to be totally dependent on OPEC because then they can control the amount of supply and they can control the price. So we have to be really careful not to farm out production of certain things. Like you guys saw this in the pandemic, the farming out of computer chips, and then all of a sudden we can't buy vehicles because we can't they can't get computer chips from these foreign countries like China. So anyway, we have to be really careful about that. This is sometimes called protectionism. Sometimes you want to protect maybe your farmers or your computer chip makers or whatever. You want to protect them, so you come up with tariffs or quotas that only allow so much of a product to be imported into the country. There is not a thing wrong with being a protectionist. You can go too far, but this is one thing that our country has not done in quite a while, is protecting its citizens from countries that could actually cause harm through trade. Okay, so computer chips, you might say, well, that's not a big deal. You know, if we don't have cars, we've got old cars that don't run on a chip or whatever, you know. But, you know, if we start farming out all of our, let's say, beef production or something, you know, then all of a sudden they have total control. The other country has total control. So you don't want to do that. You want to have some protection of your workers, your farmers, your ranchers, your manufacturers in your country. But at the same time, you want to be able to reap the benefits of maybe a cost benefit of trading with a country that can produce it at a lower cost. So a lot of companies have gone to outsourcing where they, you know, have goods made in a country that has lower labor costs. So in Mexico, for example, or maybe an Asian country, and then brought back into the United States. So that is something that a lot of companies have done, and that was something that Trump was trying to turn around. In fact, when you go out there on the government sites now, you see that Biden is pretty much trying to take credit for it, but yeah, that actually happened in the Trump administration. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not a big Trumper fan, don't like the guy at all. But I'm just telling you as a matter of a fact, that's what happened. Okay, so up here I gave you some information on that. Nearly 13 million workers employed in the U.S. factories make up the industry's largest workforce since the Great Recession caused employment sector to plunge more than a dozen years ago. Since April, manufacturing employment has been growing about 4% annually. There's more to this, I think. Here it is. So manufacturing jobs are coming back slowly, but the ones that are coming back, I mean, if it's growing at 4%, that's pretty good. And then the jobs that are there are not just, cheap jobs like a McDonald's job. I mean, these people are making a living at these manufacturing jobs. So something to think about. I don't know, again, I may have, yeah, I have a link out there for Absolute Advantage, and it kind of walks you through. There's a little video on it and talks about what Absolute Advantage is. And then I have one for Comparative Advantage, so you can walk through that. Again, there's another little video if you want to read more about that. There's a little section here, or a little link to the tariff schedule. I wonder if I've got that. Give me just a second here. Yeah, right here where I'm talking about tariffs. I'll get to that here in just a second. Anyway, there are a number of ways that countries can keep other countries from their goods from coming in. And so I've given you several examples here: natural barriers, tariff barriers, and non-tariff barriers. You don't have to memorize that for the test. You know what a natural barrier is. I mean, if something has to be shipped halfway around the world to get to the country that you're trying to send it to, that's a natural barrier. It's going to cost so much to get it there that it might not be worth it, not be affordable by consumers. So there are always natural barriers to get around. Of course, we've done that with freight lines, and we've done that with airplanes, where we put things you may not know, but in the bottom of your airplane that you're flying on commercially, there a lot of times are just pallets and pallets of goods that are being moved. So anyway, natural barriers, of course, but here's tariffs. Or a government can use a tariff. So most commonly applied trade restriction is the tariff, and a tariff sometimes is called an import duty. It's just a tax. So definitely highlight that. It's just a tax on the stuff that's being imported into the country. So if a company decides they're not going to make it, they're just going to have China make it, for example, and they're going to buy it from them and have it brought in, they're going to pay an import duty on it to get into the United States. And that's, of course, going to raise their cost, and it's going to raise the consumer's price for whatever it is. So we do have tariffs and I put some information about different kinds of tariffs. Average is about 2%, which is not bad at all, really. But there are protective tariffs that we use to protect our own domestic industries. And I gave you some examples, like sugar, for example. 63 cents a pound is what's being paid. You'd have to pay in tariffs to have it imported into the country. So that protects our sugar industries in Florida. And so I gave you some others like chocolate and olives and stuff like that. But anyway, a protective tariff, a duty, a tax on the stuff coming in is there to protect our American workers. Okay, you could set up a quota and say we're only going to have so much. I wrote quantity here. We're going to have so much of a certain good come into the country. So notice here I wrote the U.S. currently doesn't have any absolute quotas. We do have some quotas, but they're fixed with a tariff. You can, bring in so much, but then after that amount, you pay a tariff, basically. But quotas, might be, and I'm just going to use sugar as an example. that you could bring in, you could have imported in the United States so many tons of sugar. And then after that, there would not be allowed anymore to come across the border. So you could do quotas. We could do an embargo if we have a country that we're not happy with. Maybe we're at war with them. Maybe they're doing something that we don't want them to do, human rights violations, whatever it is. We could put on sanctions, economic sanctions, or we could put on an embargo and not trade with them at all. That's what an embargo is. So anyway, those are probably the three you need to know: tariffs, quotas, embargo. Probably be the ones I would put on the test. Excuse me. Again, I have all of those links. By the way, this is the tariff schedule. If you're wondering, well, how much are tariffs on vegetables coming in, root vegetables or fruits and nuts? They have sections on each one of these, and you go in, it tells you. They have big, long tables. You may not be that interested in. Oh, this one's a PDF here. So we're going to have to, I'm just going to ease out of that. That's too much stuff in there. Quotas. Here's some information on quotas. And again, we don't have absolute quotas, but we do have some where there's a certain amount of brooms you can bring in. And after that, you have to pay tariffs on it. So anyway, you can read through that. Here are some examples of the trade embargoes that we've had with Cuba and China and North Korea and all kinds of countries for different things they've done. You know, it's our political retaliation, I guess you'd say, the way we react. Okay, so let's go back to the notes here. Here's some reasons for restricting trade. One is to protect American jobs. So you might restrict trade to keep our workers in a job and to protect the industry that they're in. Okay, you might use a quota or something to retaliate against something a nation is doing. But here's one that just makes sense. Why do we have restrictions on animals or food coming into this country? It's to protect our health. And then, of course, some things that come in have to be regulated to protect our national security. So electronics, for example. So those are reasons for restricting trade. Here's some reasons against using trade restrictions. Of course, if you put on some kind of trade restriction and you make the tariff a tariff on something, you're going to have higher prices for consumers because whoever's importing it will have to account for that cost. So definitely higher prices, and you're going to have fewer choices because sometimes those importers will say, I'm just not going to import it. It just costs too much. I'm not making enough on it. Okay, here's some information on illegal dumping. Some countries have tried illegal dumping in the United States, and I'll give you some examples over here. We've had it with automobiles and other stuff. But we don't want a country to sell something in the United States that's much lower than what we could produce it for in the United States, and drive our own companies out of business. And so you have to be real careful about allowing so much to come in of a low-priced item. There's a lot of stuff in here. World Trade Organization. They basically are the kind of the watchdog for, well, if you have two countries that one, there's a set of trade rules, and if one of the countries breaches those rules, they can come to the WTO, and then the WTO will make a ruling on how that barrier should be handled. But anyway, the WTO is in Switzerland, neutral country. The World Bank, you can read about the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. Again, I have links out there to those. IMF's part of the UN, and it provides basically funding for lower income countries, lower third world countries. So they may need funding to rebuild. They may need funding to be a part of trade, whatever. Anyway, the IMF is a place where they can get a loan. I usually don't put a lot about any of that stuff on the test, so that's why I kind of skipped through it pretty quickly. We've had 8 rounds, a lot of rounds, but in the Uruguay round of trade negotiations between all these countries, they established the WTO, so that's why I put it in there. So I mean, you got 164 countries, and the United States is a big player, but then you got all the other big countries in there, Germany, and you got all the OPEC, all those countries have a vote. So you can go back and read through all that stuff. Again, I probably won't put a lot of that on the test. NAFTA, we were talking about a minute ago, is no longer called NAFTA. It's called the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. So our farmers weren't really getting a fair deal on things like dairy, eggs, milk, poultry, peanuts, things that we would export out of this country. So that's what Trump was trying to do. I don't think there's more of this here. So it says like here, the main idea of USMCA is to eliminate or greatly reduce tariffs on goods moving among the 3 countries. So, I mean, we're right here together. Why should you have why should it take so long to get something across the border? And why should it cost consumers to have to pay for that kind of thing? Well, we still have protections there, but this is about 500 million people group, our 3 group alliance here. And, if we say we're not going to charge these particular tariffs, or we're not going to charge anything from moving from one country to the next, or if we're going to have an expedited system for moving it faster from one country to the next, you can save consumers a lot of money that way. There are a bunch of these little groups across the world. So I wrote in several. Here's Central America Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, CAFTA. Well, it's not that anymore. It's called Dominican Republic Central America Free Trade Agreement. So it's CAFTA DR, Dominican Republic. So here's some of the countries that are in it: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic. So again, you might think for the U.S., it's not a big deal, but I mean, we have a surplus with these countries now. We bring in a lot of fruits and things from those countries, vegetables and fruits from those countries, coffee, whatever it might be from down there. And, we need to be able to sell our products to them. And this was one of the good things we've had actually happen, to be able to come up with a trade surplus with them. But anyway, Asian countries, same way. And I listed I don't know if these are all of them, but Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. So, I mean, that's a huge market. I think this is more like 667 million people now that are trading in that group, not tariff-free probably, but close to it. You probably have heard more about the EU. The 2 you probably heard about is NAFTA and then the EU, the European Union. European Union's been around for a long time now, but it really didn't kick up until probably the 90s or so, where we really started to see it kick up and into the 2000s. But I wrote you some notes over here on the side. Now it's 27 countries. It's 27 countries because one country left, and that's Great Britain. You might have heard on the news about Brexit, in 2020 that Great Britain got out of the EU. Well, the EU's whole purpose was to have one bank, European Community Bank, which is now called the European Central Bank. They wanted to have one currency, the euro, and they have a president. And anyway, the British didn't want to be part of that. Ireland is still in there, but Great Britain got out of it. So anyway, I wrote up here Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, and then I told you about Brexit. So you can read back through that if you want to. And of course, OPEC, you probably heard of OPEC, especially because we've had such fluctuations in gas prices. And it's all caused because we're not producing as much as we used to. And OPEC has the right to limit the supply that we get or anybody gets from them. So again, I wrote down the countries that are part of OPEC, but Iran, Iraq, let's see, Saudi Arabia is the big one, United Arab Emirates, Venezuela. I think they were the originals that were in there, the first 5 countries, and they picked up a few more countries over the years. But the Saudi Arabia area, that's going to be where most of that oil and gas is. And again, we can't rely just on them because that's going to be where they can control the supply, they can control the price. If you want to get into exporting, probably the easiest way to do it is either just export it to a buyer in another country or license another company in another country to make your product. All kinds of problems that you could get into with licensing or franchising in another country. But I don't know if again, let me go out here and look. Here's one on the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, USMC. I just had a bunch of these, so I'm just closing them out. Here's the countries in the EU I listed for you so you can see who's in there. So let's see. Here's the International Trade Administration. We'll come back to that. But let me go through some of this stuff here. This exporting is probably the least, so I wrote it over here, least complicated and risky method for getting your product into another country. So someone a company in the other country wants to buy your product, if you're allowed to sell it to them across country lines without a tariff or quota or something going on. You do that, and then it's pretty low risk because you've made the product and you know what the quality of the product is. It gets shipped over there. The only thing it could be wrong is it was damaged during shipment, but then it's put out on their shelves and they sell it. So it's pretty low risk. What I've done is I've given you links over here to go to the International Trade Administration, U.S. export regulations. They even have a rural team that can help you if you wanted to do exporting. So if you go to, I'm just going to scroll down here. This is International Trade Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and you can go in and learn how to export. You can go in and research the markets that are in whatever country you're wanting to sell in. Find buyers in those countries. It'll show you different expos that are held in those countries, and you can go there, meet up with buyers, make a deal. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff in there on their site. So just bunches and bunches of stuff. Anyway, there's a set of U.S. export regulations on one of those links. You can watch the little video, but you can go in and you can read what are the regulations for trading, for exporting. And then here's that rural team I was telling you about. Again, they have a little video on it, but most of our companies are small companies, and then there are a lot of companies that are out in rural areas. So we don't have access to. I don't have access to shipping as much as like Houston would have. They have a port. So I'm not near a big airport. So anyway, the International Trade Administration rural team can actually help you get started. Okay, so let me go back to the list here. So I could export it. I could license another company in another country to make the product in the other country. I mean, think about this. What kind of problems could happen in licensing? Well, you don't know that when they make the product, that they make it with the same quality that you would have made it. If you give them your proprietary information, how it's made, or how you use the raw materials to make it, you're letting that information get out. That's bad. So there's lots of problems that you could run into. So I wrote down things like trademark infringement or patent infringement, or giving trade secrets to another country, your proprietary knowledge for how it was made. Franchising the same way. I mean, if you start a franchise business here in the United States, and you sell franchises to another country, then all of a sudden they have your ways of making whatever it is. And then what if their government comes in, or someone throws the government, takes over everything? Well, now they own whatever's there. So anyway, you could do contract manufacturing, and I wrote you a definition kind of out here. Contract manufacturing allows a foreign firm to produce a certain product to specification, but the domestic firm's brand name is on it. That could be a real problem, if it's not up to standard. So contract manufacturing, you could have them put their own brand name on it, and you could give them like a trial run kind of thing. You could go into business with a company that's in another country, and that's called a joint venture when you're in business together. A joint venture to make a certain product, and maybe you need it made in Mexico and sold in Mexico, and you go into business. In fact, a lot of countries will not let you just come in and buy a facility and start making and selling product there. A lot of countries, one of the ways you get in there is you have to partner up with a business that's already there. So something to think about, joint venture, or you could just wholly own direct foreign investment. In other words, wholly owned facility. You just go and build an entire facility in Mexico and for example, and start making product. So I wrote down here, this is the greatest potential risk, because the political situation in some of these countries is very unstable, and it's very difficult to get your people out and to get your all your processes, making sure that doesn't fall into the wrong hands and stuff like that. Okay, and then counter trade, you could do bartering with another country. So instead of taking money as payment or something, you take goods as payment. So a lot of businesses do that for sure. Okay, I wrote you some information about nationalism. Nationalism does not have to be protectionism. Nationalism means, some countries would not allow you to come in because they're protecting their particular business, that is their national pride, and they're never going to let that be sold to a foreign country, or for a foreign company to come in and take it over, something like that. So protectionism is just protecting our U.S. workers and our U.S. industries, so that they don't lose jobs. We don't lose jobs. So certainly nationalism could be protectionism, and vice versa, I guess, but they don't have to be the same thing. So you can read about that. Of course, these companies are multinational corporations. They operate in multiple countries, And so I gave you an example over here, like Starbucks. They have 32,000 stores in 80 countries. And so I gave you kind of a list of what they do and where they do it. Of course, they've got to pay taxes in the United States. They have to pay taxes in the UK when they work there. And anyway, it can be a very complicated thing. Down here, I wrote Walmart's the biggest multinational firm in the world. $600 billion they made in 22. I think this was revenue. Yeah, revenue. But you can see we have ExxonMobil, which is a U.S. company, number 5, Apple, number 9, Berkshire Hathaway, number 11. So I think China is number 2, 3, and 4 on the list, actually. So they've got a lot of them right up in the top 2, in the top 5, I guess. Large multinational companies, they have headquarters. For example, our Starbucks headquarters is in Seattle. Seattle is pretty smart because Seattle doesn't have a state income tax or corporate income tax. So all they're paying is, they're federal. And so that's a break for them. Same thing with Texas. So anyway, you can read more about that and more about the trends in global competition. So again, this is just a short kind of overview of chapter 3. Definitely read back through my notes. I'll put this out there where you can click on the links if you want to do some more research on that. And I'll post this video sometime before or after our class on Tuesday. Thank you.